My boyfriend broke up with me for no reason, even after I always supported him. But since the house is in my name, I told him to go live in his car. I need to tell you this story because even now, 6 months later, I still can't believe how blind I was. My name is Maya, and for 6 years I thought I was in a partnership. Turns out, I was just funding someone else's delusions. It started innocently enough. When I met him at that coffee shop near campus, he had this infectious energy about becoming the next big YouTuber. Gaming content, he said, was going to be his ticket to millions. I was 22, fresh out of college with my marketing degree. And honestly, his confidence was attractive. While I worked my ass off at a digital agency pulling 60-hour weeks, he spent days editing videos that barely got 50 views. "You just don't understand the algorithm," he'd say whenever I gently suggested maybe he needed a backup plan. "Once it clicks, we'll be set for life." We moved in together after 8 months. Well, technically he moved into my place. The house was my inheritance from my grandparents. A modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland. No mortgage, just property taxes and utilities. It felt too big for just me, and having him there made it feel like home. That's when the pattern started. His YouTube dreams morphed into day trading, then crypto, then NFTs. Each venture required him to focus completely, which meant I covered rent. Except there was no rent, just the bills. Groceries, utilities, internet, car insurance for both our vehicles, everything. He'd contribute maybe $200 every few months when he sold some equipment or borrowed from his parents. "I'm investing in our future," became his favorite phrase. "These opportunities won't wait for a traditional job." I wanted to be supportive. The marketing world had taught me that success rarely follows conventional paths. So I convinced myself this was just his unconventional journey. While my salary grew from $40,000 to $75,000 over those years, his income remained theoretical. The house became his office, his studio, his sanctuary. He converted the spare bedroom into his workspace, filling it with monitors, recording equipment, and trading setups that cost more than I made in 2 months. Money I'd worked overtime to save disappeared into his latest, "sure thing. Once this takes off, I'll pay you back everything plus more," he promised. I kept a mental tally at first, but stopped counting somewhere around $15,000. It hurt too much. My friends started making comments. Subtle at first, then increasingly direct. "Does he even look for regular work?" my best friend asked during one of our monthly dinners. I'd make excuses about entrepreneurship and risk-taking, but deep down, their questions echoed my growing doubts. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was how he made me feel guilty for having concerns. When I'd suggest he might consider part-time work while building his brand, he'd accuse me of not believing in him. When I mentioned our financial imbalance, he'd remind me that emotional support was invaluable. And wasn't he always there for me? Except he wasn't really there. Not when I got promoted and wanted to celebrate. Not when my grandmother passed and I needed comfort. He was always too focused on his next big break to notice my actual life happening around him. By year 5, I realized I wasn't his girlfriend anymore. I was his financial safety net with benefits. But I stayed because leaving felt like admitting failure, and because somewhere deep down, I still hoped he'd prove everyone wrong and we'd look back on this struggle as our origin story. I had no idea he was already writing a completely different ending. The changes started subtly in month 6 of year 6. Little comments that felt off, like when he mentioned the living room furniture was outdated, and maybe we should organize the space better. This from someone whose idea of organization was leaving coffee cups in every room for me to collect. "You know, Maya, successful people curate their environments," he said one evening while I was cooking dinner. He was sprawled on my grandmother's vintage sofa, the one I'd grown up reading books on. "This whole place feels very stuck in the past." I paused, wooden spoon mid-stir. "What do you mean?" "Just that maybe it's time to make this place reflect who we're becoming, not where we've been." He gestured vaguely around the room. "I've been watching this minimalism guru on YouTube. Really revolutionary stuff about intentional living." Revolutionary. Everything was revolutionary with him. His crypto strategies were revolutionary. His NFT insights were revolutionary. His understanding of social media algorithms was revolutionary. The only thing that wasn't revolutionary was his contribution to our household expenses. The criticism escalated. Suddenly, my grandmother's china cabinet was cluttering the dining space. The family photos on the mantle were creating negative energy flow. My books, organized by author on built-in shelves, were overwhelming visual noise. "I'm just trying to help you see possibilities," he'd say when I got defensive. "You're so attached to stuff that doesn't serve your growth." Meanwhile, his workspace expanded. The spare bedroom wasn't enough anymore. He needed the dining room for his ring light setup. The garage became storage for equipment he bought and abandoned within months. His presence filled every corner of my house while simultaneously making me feel like I didn't belong there. Then came the philosophical phase. He started talking about finding himself and breaking free from societal conditioning. He'd spend hours on Reddit forums dedicated to men's self-improvement, coming back with theories about traditional relationships and gender roles that made my skin crawl. "I've been doing a lot of internal work lately," he announced one Tuesday, using the tone he reserved for his most profound revelations. "I'm realizing how much mental and emotional labor I've been carrying in this relationship." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What kind of emotional labor?" "Well, I'm always the one keeping things positive around here. When you come home stressed from work, I have to manage your moods. I'm constantly thinking about our future while you're focused on day-to-day stuff. It's exhausting being the visionary in the relationship." The visionary. The man who hadn't held a job in 3 years thought he was carrying our emotional load because he occasionally said, "Don't stress about work," when I paid our bills. But the strangest part was how he started treating the house like he was already planning changes without me. He'd measure rooms while I was at work. I'd come home to find furniture moved around just to see how it flows. He started answering the door when delivery drivers came, introducing himself as if he was the primary resident. "I've been thinking we should get quotes for hardwood floors in the bedrooms," he mentioned casually over breakfast. "Carpet is so dated, and if we're going to be here long-term, like it was a mutual decision, like the house wasn't already mine, inherited and paid for before I met him." His sleep schedule shifted too. He'd stay up until 3 a.m. watching educational content about cryptocurrency markets in Asia, then sleep until noon while I went to work. When I'd get home at 6, he'd act like his day was just beginning, full of energy and plans that required funding he didn't have. "I think I need more space to really focus," he said one evening. "Maybe you could work from the coffee shop sometimes? I'm at a critical stage with this new project, and I need complete mental clarity. Complete mental clarity. In the house I owned. To work on projects that had never earned $1. Looking back, I can see he was already planning his exit. Testing boundaries, establishing himself as the decision maker, making me feel like a guest in my own home. He was conditioning me to accept less while he prepared to take more. But I didn't see it then. I thought he was just going through another phase, like the time he decided he was going to become a minimalist monk, or when he spent 3 months convinced he could make millions dropshipping phone cases. I had no idea he was actually rehearsing for the performance of a lifetime. The conversation that ended everything happened on a Thursday evening in March. I remember because I'd just gotten a bonus at work and was actually excited to share good news with him for once. Instead, I walked into what felt like an intervention. He was waiting for me in the living room, sitting forward on the edge of the sofa with his hands clasped, like he'd been rehearsing. The coffee table had been cleared except for a yellow legal pad covered in his handwriting. "Maya, we need to talk." His voice had that serious tone he usually reserved for explaining why his latest venture was definitely going to work this time. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship dynamic, and I don't think this is working anymore." I set my purse down slowly, confusion mixing with sudden dread. What isn't working? This whole arrangement. I feel like I'm carrying all the emotional labor while you coast through life focused only on your 9 to 5. He gestured to his notes. "I've been documenting patterns, and it's pretty clear that our partnership is completely unbalanced." I stared at him. Unbalanced? "Look, I know you think because you pay the bills, you're contributing more, but relationships aren't just about money, Maya. They're about emotional investment, domestic responsibility, future planning. And honestly, you're failing in most of those areas." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm failing? When's the last time you initiated a deep conversation about our goals? When have you taken charge of planning our social calendar or managing household organization? I'm constantly the one thinking about our future while you just show up and expect everything to be handled." I felt like I was in an alternate reality. "You think I don't contribute to household organization? I mean, look around." He waved toward the kitchen. "When's the last time you deep cleaned the baseboards? Or organized the pantry by categories? I'm always the one noticing when things need attention and taking initiative to improve our living space. Our living space. My house that I'd inherited, maintained, and paid every single expense for while he played house with my money. And don't even get me started on emotional availability," he continued, consulting his notes. "You come home from work stressed and negative, and I'm constantly having to manage your mood and keep our energy positive. It's exhausting being the emotional anchor in this relationship." I found my voice. "You think you're the emotional anchor?" Maya, be honest. When you have a bad day, who listens to you vent? When you're worried about work stuff, who talks you through it and helps you see the bigger picture? When you're being pessimistic about money, who reminds you to trust the process and think abundantly? You're talking about abundance while I pay for everything we own? See? This is exactly what I mean. He shook his head like I was proving his point. You reduce everything to money because you can't see the value in emotional and spiritual contributions. You think just because you have a traditional job, you're somehow carrying more weight, but you're completely blind to all the invisible work I do. The invisible work. 6 years of funding his dreams while he criticized my furniture and told me to think positively about our finances. I think we need to take a break, he said, and I heard finality in his voice. I need space to focus on my personal growth without having to constantly manage your limitations. This relationship has become codependent, and it's holding both of us back. I stood there processing his words. After 6 years of supporting him through every failed venture, of believing in him when nobody else did, of working overtime to fund his equipment and dreams, he was breaking up with me because I didn't organize the pantry correctly. So that's it, I managed to say. You're ending our relationship because I don't contribute enough emotionally? I'm ending it because I deserve a partner who matches my energy and vision for the future. Someone who understands that success requires sacrifice and isn't constantly worried about money. He stood up, somehow managing to look noble. I need someone who supports my journey instead of limiting it with small-minded thinking. Small-minded thinking. From someone who'd never paid rent in his adult life. Fine, I heard myself say. If that's how you feel, then I guess we're done. He nodded, looking almost relieved. I think this is best for both of us. Don't worry, I'll handle telling people. I know these conversations can be difficult for you. Handle telling people. Like I was incapable of managing my own social relationships. As I watched him fold up his yellow pad of notes, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was there, but underneath it was something sharper. Clarity, maybe, or just the beginning of anger at how completely he'd rewritten our story. I had no idea he was about to rewrite a lot more than that. The morning after our breakup, I woke up expecting to find him packing. Instead, he was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened, humming while he scrolled through his phone. "Good morning," he said cheerfully when I appeared in the doorway. I was thinking we should finally get that espresso machine we talked about, now that I have more mental space to focus on the details that matter. I stared at him. We broke up last night. Right. But that doesn't mean we can't be mature about the transition. He poured coffee into 2 mugs, offering me one. I've been researching conscious uncoupling. The key is maintaining respect and shared vision even when romantic dynamics shift. Shared vision. He was talking about buying appliances 12 hours after ending our relationship. Over the next few days, his behavior became increasingly surreal. He didn't pack a single box. Instead, he started making plans for the house like he'd been promoted to head of household operations. "I'm thinking we should convert the garage into a proper studio space," he mentioned while I was getting ready for work. "It would be perfect for content creation, and I could soundproof it so my recording doesn't disturb you." "Why would you record here if we're not together anymore?" "Maya, just because our romantic relationship ended doesn't mean our practical partnership has to. We can be evolved about this." He pulled up photos on his laptop. "Look at this setup. With the right lighting and acoustic panels, that garage could be a professional production facility." Production facility. In my garage. After ending our relationship because I didn't contribute enough, he started measuring rooms again, this time openly. I'd come home from work to find him in the spare bedroom with a tape measure and notebook, sketching floor plans. "What are you doing?" "Planning some upgrades. This space has so much potential if we just think creatively about the layout." He showed me his drawing. "I could fit a much better desk configuration in here, maybe add some floating shelves for equipment storage." "But you don't live here anymore?" "Technically. I still live here until I find the right space for my next phase." He said it like he was doing me a favor by staying. And honestly, why waste this opportunity? This house could be amazing with some vision and effort. The vision and effort he was planning to invest in my house after breaking up with me for not contributing enough vision and effort. But the strangest part was how he started talking about the future. Our future. Except now it was framed as a business partnership instead of a romantic one. "I was thinking you could handle the practical stuff, utilities, maintenance, that kind of thing, and I could focus on the creative improvements and long-term property value enhancement," he explained over dinner. Dinner that I'd bought and cooked. "It's actually perfect. You get security and I get space to build something meaningful." Security. In my own house. "Where exactly am I supposed to live in this arrangement?" I asked. "Well, your mom's place is nice, right? And it's probably time for you to reconnect with family anyway. I've noticed you don't prioritize those relationships enough. He gestured around the dining room. Meanwhile, I could really maximize this space for productivity. Win-win. I set down my fork. You want me to move out of my own house so you can live here alone? I want us both to optimize our living situations for growth. You're too attached to this place emotionally to see its real potential. But I could transform it into something that actually generates value instead of just being a place to store old furniture. Old furniture. My grandmother's antiques that I'd grown up loving? Plus, let's be honest about the financial reality here, he continued. You're spending way too much money maintaining this place. Property taxes, utilities, upkeep, it's bleeding you dry. If I took over the primary residence responsibility, I could implement some cost-saving strategies and actually make this place profitable. Profitable? With what money, I wanted to ask, but I was too stunned by the audacity. Think about it logically, Maya. You work long hours, so you're barely here anyway. I'm here all day maximizing the space. Doesn't it make sense for the person who's actually present to be the primary decision maker for the property? Primary decision maker. For the house I owned outright. That night, lying in bed listening to him research recording equipment prices in the next room, I realized he genuinely believed this was all going to work out exactly as he'd planned. He'd convinced himself that breaking up with me was just the first step in a larger reorganization, where he got everything he wanted without any of the responsibilities. He had no idea that the house wasn't his to reorganize. 2 weeks after our breakup, I came home from work to find a woman's jacket draped over my grandmother's rocking chair. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm as I heard voices coming from the kitchen. And this is the heart of the house. Obviously, he was saying in the tour guide voice he used when he was trying to impress someone. I've been planning some updates to really optimize the flow. Maybe knock out this wall between the kitchen and dining room to create more of an open concept. I walked into my own kitchen to find him showing a petite blonde woman around like he was a real estate agent. She was pretty in that effortless way that made me immediately self-conscious in my work clothes. Oh, the woman looked startled when she saw me. I'm so sorry, I didn't know someone else was here. This is Maya, he said smoothly. Like introducing his ex-girlfriend to his new date in my kitchen was perfectly normal. Maya, meet Sarah. Sarah, this is Maya, my former partner. She's just finishing up her transition out. My transition out. Of my own house. Nice to meet you, Sarah said politely, though she looked confused. This is a beautiful place. You must be sad to leave. Before I could respond, he jumped in. Maya's actually really excited about this next phase. She's been wanting to reconnect with her family more, and this arrangement gives her that freedom while allowing me to finally implement some of the vision I've had for this property. Vision for my property. The bones of this house are incredible, he continued, walking Sarah toward the living room. Built in the 50s, solid construction, but it's been stuck in this vintage aesthetic that doesn't really serve modern living. I'm thinking we could update the whole color palette, maybe go with something more minimalist and clean. Like they were moving in together. Into my house. I love old houses, Sarah said, running her hand along the mantel where my family photos were displayed. There's so much character in the details. Exactly. That's what I keep trying to explain to people who don't understand design psychology. You can honor the character while still making it functional for contemporary life. He gestured toward my grandmother's china cabinet. Like, this piece is nice, but it's taking up space that could be used for something more purposeful. Something more purposeful than my family heirlooms. Would you like to see the office space? He asked Sarah, guiding her toward the spare bedroom where all his equipment was set up. This is where I do most of my content creation and strategic planning. I followed them, morbidly curious about how far he'd take this performance. Wow, this is quite a setup, Sarah said, looking at his monitors and recording gear. You must be really successful with your online work. It's been an incredible journey, he replied, settling into his desk chair like he was holding court. I've built multiple revenue streams across different platforms. Crypto consulting, NFT curation, YouTube content creation. The key is diversifying your digital presence and staying ahead of market trends. Multiple revenue streams. The man who hadn't contributed to a single household expense in 3 years. I'm actually at a really exciting inflection point with my brand, he continued. That's part of why having this dedicated workspace is so crucial. I need to be able to create content without distractions, and this environment is perfect for that level of focus. This environment. My spare bedroom that I'd let him use out of kindness. The acoustics in here are amazing too, he added, tapping the wall. I've been thinking about adding some professional sound dampening, maybe some mood lighting for video content. Really turn this into a proper studio. That sounds incredible, Sarah said, and I could hear genuine admiration in her voice. You're so entrepreneurial. I wish I had that kind of vision. Most people don't, he replied, shooting me a meaningful look. They get stuck in conventional thinking and can't see possibilities beyond their comfort zone. But when you're building something meaningful, you have to be willing to think bigger than other people expect. Thinking bigger. With my money, in my house, after breaking up with me for not being supportive enough. Should we check out the garage? He asked Sarah. I'm planning to convert it into additional workspace. Content creation really requires multiple environments depending on the type of project. As I watched him lead Sarah out to tour my garage like it was his personal renovation project, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just disrespectful or delusional. This was a deliberate performance designed to establish himself as the owner and decision-maker of my property in front of his new girlfriend. He was literally trying to steal my house by acting like it was already his. But he'd made one crucial mistake in his elaborate fantasy. He'd forgotten that I actually owned the deed. I spent that weekend making one phone call and one very important trip to the hardware store. Monday morning, while he was at the gym giving Sarah a tour of his neighborhood, I had the locks changed. All of them. Front door, back door, garage, even the basement entrance he'd forgotten existed. The locksmith was finishing up when I saw them walking down the street together. Her arm linked through his as he pointed out improvements he was considering for the landscaping. I watched from my living room window as they approached the front door, him reaching confidently for his keys. The key didn't work. I saw confusion cross his face as he tried again, jiggling the handle like the problem was mechanical rather than fundamental. Sarah stood beside him looking puzzled as he checked his keychain, tried a different key, then went back to the original. That's weird, I heard him say through the window. Maybe Maya changed something while we were out. Maybe Maya changed something. In Maya's house. He knocked on the door, not aggressively, but with the casual expectation of someone who assumed he'd be let in to figure out this minor inconvenience. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Hey Maya, something's wrong with the lock, he said, holding up his key. Did you have maintenance done today? I had the locks changed, I replied simply. Changed? He looked genuinely confused. Why would you change the locks? Because it's my house. And you don't live here anymore. The confusion on his face shifted to something like panic. Maya, we talked about this. Just because our romantic relationship ended doesn't mean we can't be mature about the practical arrangements. What practical arrangements would those be? I mean, all my stuff is here. My office is set up, my equipment, my clothes. You can't just lock me out without notice. My equipment, he'd said, bought with my money, in my house after he'd broken up with me. Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable as she began to understand the situation. I'm sorry, I think there's been some confusion, she said quietly. I thought you lived here. I do live here, he said quickly. This is just a misunderstanding. Maya's going through a difficult transition and she's not thinking clearly. I looked directly at Sarah. Has he told you this is his house? She glanced between us, clearly realizing she'd walked into something much more complicated than a simple breakup. He said you were moving out and he was taking over the property management. Property management, I repeated. Of the house I inherited from my grandparents. The house that's been in my name for 6 years. The house I've paid every expense for while he pursued his entrepreneurial dreams. The color drained from his face. Maya, don't do this. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm embarrassing myself? I stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me. You brought your new girlfriend to tour my house like it was yours. You've been planning renovations to my property and telling her about your vision for my space. And I'm embarrassing myself? Sarah took a step back. I should go, she said quietly. No, wait, he said, reaching for her arm. This is exactly the kind of drama I was trying to avoid. Maya has trouble with boundaries, and she's making this much more complicated than it needs to be. Boundaries. The man living rent-free in my house was lecturing me about boundaries. Let me make the boundaries very clear, I said. This is my house. My name is on the deed, which I can show you if needed. You have 30 minutes to collect your essential items, and then you need to leave. 30 minutes? Maya, be reasonable. I have thousands of dollars of equipment in there, my entire business setup. You can't just... I can absolutely do this. And I am doing this. I crossed my arms. Your business setup that you've never made money from, using equipment bought with my financial support in space I provided for free. 30 minutes. Sarah was already walking away, pulling out her phone. I heard her tell someone she needed a ride, her voice tight with embarrassment. Look what you've done, he hissed at me. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find someone who understands entrepreneurship? She was perfect. She deserved to know the truth about who she was dating. The truth? He laughed bitterly. The truth is that you're a controlling, vindictive person who can't handle that I've outgrown this relationship. The truth is that you're sabotaging my success because you're threatened by my potential. My potential that I'd been funding for 6 years while he criticized my housekeeping. 28 minutes now, I said, checking my watch. As I watched him fumble with his phone, probably calling friends to vent about my unreasonable behavior, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete clarity about who was responsible for what in my own life. It was a good feeling. 3 days after the lockout, my friend David called me with information I wasn't expecting. Maya, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. David had been friends with both of us since college, one of those diplomatic people who tried to stay neutral in relationship drama. I ran into him at that coffee shop downtown yesterday, and he started talking about your breakup. I settled into my grandmother's rocking chair, finally able to enjoy it without him analyzing its feng shui impact. What did he say? He told me he'd been planning to end things for months because you were financially controlling and emotionally manipulative. He said you were holding him back from his potential and that he'd finally found the courage to choose his own happiness. Months. He'd been planning this for months while I supported him and believed in his dreams. But here's the thing, Maya. He also told me something that doesn't make any sense. David's voice carried a note of confusion. He said he was throwing a housewarming party next weekend to celebrate finally having his own space to be creative. My blood went cold. A housewarming party? At your house. He sent me an invitation yesterday with your address, talking about how excited he was to show everyone his new place and his upgraded home office setup. I sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Even after I'd locked him out and told him explicitly that he didn't live here anymore, he was still telling people the house was his. David, did he say anything else about the living situation? Yeah, actually. He said you'd been staying there temporarily after your breakup, but you'd finally agreed to move back with your parents so he could have the space he needed for his business. He made it sound like some kind of mutual decision. Mutual decision. To move out of my own house. He also mentioned something about having to change the locks because you'd been stopping by unannounced and it was affecting his productivity. I laughed, a sharp sound that surprised me. He said I was stopping by unannounced? Maya, what's really going on here? Because his story doesn't match what you told me about him being unemployed and you supporting him. I filled David in on the real situation. The inheritance, the financial support, the breakup conversation where he'd criticized my contributions, and the surreal week of him acting like he owned my property. Jesus, David said when I finished. So when he's telling people about his housewarming party, he's planning to host a party at my house, which he doesn't have access to celebrate getting his own place, which was never his place to begin with. Maya, you need to know something else. He's not just telling this story to me. I talked to some other people from our group, and he's been making the rounds. Everyone thinks you were the financially dependent one in the relationship. The manipulation was so much more extensive than I'd realized. He hadn't just been planning his exit from our relationship. He'd been crafting an entirely fictional narrative about who we were and who was supporting whom. What exactly is he telling people about money? He said he'd been covering most of the household expenses while you focused on your career. He claimed he was the one who invested in your house improvements and that he'd built up the value of the property through his renovation vision. For improvements I'd paid for to my own house. He also said something about you having emotional problems and spending issues, and that he'd been trying to help you get financially stable. Spending issues. After 6 years of funding his equipment purchases and failed ventures. There's more, David continued reluctantly. He showed people some kind of documentation, photos of receipts, bank statements, something that he claimed proved he'd been supporting you. I didn't see it directly, but other people mentioned it. My mind raced. What documentation could he possibly have? Then it hit me. He'd had access to everything. My mail, my papers, my computer when I wasn't home. He could have photographed anything, taken pieces of information out of context, created whatever narrative he wanted. David, I need you to do me a favor. Can you call around to everyone who might have gotten this story and tell them the truth? I have actual documentation if anyone wants to see it. The deed to my house, bank statements showing I paid all our bills, employment records. Of course. But Maya, you should know. He's not just spreading rumors. He's actively trying to turn people against you. Whatever his plan is, it's bigger than just covering his ass after a breakup. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house thinking about the scope of his deception. He'd been planning this exit strategy for months, complete with a false narrative that painted him as the victim and me as the problem. He'd been preparing to take over my house and rewrite our entire relationship history. But he'd made one crucial error in his elaborate con game. He'd forgotten that the truth was documented, verifiable, and completely different from his fiction. I spent Thursday evening organizing my documentation. 6 years of bank statements, utility bills, property tax records, insurance payments, grocery receipts, and every major purchase I'd made for his equipment or business ventures. The paper trail was damning and complete. Friday morning, I drafted a group text to everyone in our mutual friend circle. I kept it factual and straightforward. Hi everyone, I've learned that there's some confusion about my recent breakup and living situation. To clarify, I own my house outright, inherited 2018, have paid all household expenses for 6 years while supporting my ex's entrepreneurial pursuits, and am currently living alone in my own home. He does not live here and has never had any legal claim to this property. I have documentation if anyone needs clarification. Also, there is no housewarming party planned at my address. Thanks for understanding. I attached photos of the deed, the most recent property tax bill showing my name, and a bank statement highlighting 6 months of utility payments. Then I sent it to 32 people. My phone started ringing within minutes. The first call was from Sarah, the woman he'd brought to tour my house. Maya, I am so sorry. I had no idea. He told me you were his ex-roommate who was having trouble finding a place after your breakup. Roommate? He said you'd been living together as friends for a couple years, and that you were struggling financially, so he'd been helping with rent. I thought I was being supportive by suggesting you take your time with the transition. The creativity of his lies was almost impressive. Sarah, I need you to know that everything he told you was fabricated. I'm starting to figure that out. After what happened Monday, I started asking questions. And none of his stories add up. He can't even explain where he's staying now. That answered my next question. Where is he staying? He claimed he had a temporary place lined up, but yesterday I saw him sleeping in his car at the 24-hour gym. When I asked about it, he said it was a minimalist experiment and part of his personal growth journey. A minimalist experiment. The man who'd spent 6 years accumulating equipment and criticizing my furniture was calling homelessness a lifestyle choice. The second call came from his friend Mark, who I'd met at several social gatherings. Maya, what the hell is going on? He's been telling everyone that you stole his house and kicked him out illegally. He's talking about getting a lawyer. Mark, did you know he never paid rent or contributed to any household expenses in 6 years? Wait, what? He told me he'd been supporting you financially because you were going through some kind of career transition. He said you'd been unemployed for months. Unemployed for months. I'd been working 60-hour weeks while he played video games and planned his next failed venture. By evening, I'd received responses from most of the people on my group text. The pattern was consistent: shock, apologies, and anger at being manipulated. Several people shared additional lies he'd told them, each more elaborate than the last. The most revealing conversation came from our mutual friend James, who called around dinner time sounding confused and angry. Maya, I need to ask you something. Last week, he asked me to write a character reference letter for him. Said he was applying for business credit and needed people to vouch for his financial responsibility and work ethic. Did you write it? I started to, but then I got suspicious. He kept emphasizing that I should mention his property management responsibilities and his domestic partnership contributions. It felt weird, so I asked him what kind of business credit required character references about housework. Smart man. What did he say? He got defensive and said I wouldn't understand because I'd never been in a serious long-term relationship. But Maya, now that I'm thinking about it, he was trying to get me to create documentation that he could use to prove he'd been contributing to your household. The scope of his planning was breathtaking. He'd been systematically collecting false testimony and creating fake evidence for months, preparing for the day when he'd need to justify taking over my house. That night, I loaded everything he'd left behind into my car and drove to the local homeless shelter. His equipment, his clothes, his vision boards and business plans. All of it donated to people who actually needed help instead of people who manufactured crises for attention. Then I called his parents. It was time they knew what their son had really been doing for the past 6 years. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch at my favorite cafe when I spotted Sarah at a corner table, looking like she was working up the courage to approach me. She finally did. Maya, I'm sorry to bother you, but could I talk to you for a minute? I gestured to the empty chair across from me. She sat down looking genuinely embarrassed. I owe you an apology, she began. And an explanation, I guess. I had no idea about any of the real situation when I met him. How did you meet him? Dating app. He seemed really together. You know? Talked about his entrepreneurial work, his content creation business, his investment strategies. Said he was at a transitional moment in his housing situation, but had some exciting opportunities coming up. Transitional moment. Even his dating profile had been a fabrication. On our first date, he mentioned his recent breakup and said his ex had some mental health issues that made the separation complicated. He said he was trying to be compassionate about giving you time to find alternative living arrangements. Mental health issues? He said you developed some kind of dependency on him and were struggling with the change. He made it sound like he was being incredibly patient with someone who couldn't handle the reality of the breakup. The man who'd lived rent-free in my house for 6 years was telling his dates I was the dependent one. When he invited me to see his place, I was actually impressed that he was being so mature about staying friendly with his ex. I thought it showed emotional intelligence. Sarah, what made you realize something was wrong? Honestly, the way you reacted when you came home that day, you didn't seem like someone who was struggling with reality or having trouble accepting a breakup. You seemed like someone who was rightfully pissed off that a stranger was in her house. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. And then when he couldn't get in with his key, the panic in his eyes wasn't the panic of someone dealing with a crazy ex. It was the panic of someone whose con game had just collapsed. Have you spoken to him since? That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. Yes, and it's been disturbing. She pulled out her phone. He's been calling and texting constantly. Look at this. She showed me a series of increasingly desperate messages. The first few were attempts to explain away the house situation and convince her to give him another chance. But as they progressed, they became more erratic and manipulative. He's living in his car, Sarah continued. I saw him at the gym again yesterday and he looked rough. When he spotted me, he came over crying about how you'd destroyed his life and stolen everything he'd worked for. Did you believe him? Not for a second. But Maya, he's not just telling me this story. He's telling everyone who'll listen. I've seen him at 3 different coffee shops this week, having intense conversations with people, always playing the victim. She hesitated before continuing. Yesterday, I overheard him talking to someone about setting up a crowdfunding page. Something about recovering from financial abuse and domestic manipulation. A crowdfunding page. He was going to monetize his victim narrative. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. He asked me to sign some kind of statement about what I witnessed at the house. Said it was for his lawyer. What kind of statement? Something about you being emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. He wanted me to say I felt threatened by your behavior and that I was concerned about his safety. The legal case he'd been building. He was collecting false testimony to support some kind of harassment claim against me. I told him absolutely not, but Maya, I'm worried he's going to find people who will sign things without understanding the real situation. After Sarah left, I drove by the 24-hour gym, and sure enough, there was his car in the parking lot. The same car I'd helped him make payments on when his credit was too poor to get financing a loan. He was inside. I could see through the windows, having what looked like a very serious conversation with a young guy at one of the tables in the lobby. Even from a distance, I could read his body language. Leaning forward, gestures of frustration and injustice, the same performance I'd watched him give Sarah about my property. My phone buzzed with a text from David. He's started a GoFundMe. Says he's been made homeless by a vindictive ex who stole his house. It's already raised $800. I sat in my car staring at his campaign page on David's phone. The photos showed him looking devastated in front of his car, with a caption about surviving financial abuse and domestic violence. He'd written a long sob story about a manipulative relationship, where he'd invested everything into building a life with someone who'd turned on him the moment he tried to establish healthy boundaries. The comments were full of support and outrage on his behalf. Strangers offering him money, housing, job leads, and legal advice for dealing with his abusive ex. He'd turned his homelessness into a business model, and the product he was selling was my destruction. The call from my sister Lisa came on a Friday evening while I was finally enjoying a quiet night in my own home. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. My stomach dropped. Lisa's tone was the one she used when she was trying to manage family crisis, carefully controlled but clearly upset. What's going on? I got a call today from your ex. He said you two had some kind of verbal agreement about the house, and that you were refusing to honor it now that you'd broken up. I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was heading. Lisa, please tell me you didn't believe him. I didn't know what to believe. He was very convincing, Maya. He said you'd agreed that since he'd been maintaining the property and making improvements, he'd have some kind of ownership stake if you ever separated. That's completely fabricated. The house has always been mine, and he's never paid a single expense. But he had details, Maya. He knew about the plumbing work we did last spring and the roof repair from 2 years ago. He knew about Grandma's china cabinet and the layout of the basement. How would he know those things if he hadn't been involved in maintaining the place? Of course he knew those details. He'd lived there for 6 years while I paid for everything, including those repairs. Lisa, did he ask you for money? Silence. Then, he said he needed help with legal fees to resolve the property dispute. He was very specific about the amount, $2,000 for a consultation with a real estate attorney. And you gave it to him? I gave him a loan, Maya. He signed a promissory note and everything. He said once the legal situation was resolved, he'd pay me back immediately. A promissory note. He'd convinced my own sister to loan him money based on completely fictional legal claims against my house. Lisa, what exactly did he tell you? He said you two had been in a common-law marriage situation, and that under state law he was entitled to compensation for his contributions to the property. He said his attorney had advised him that he had a strong case for at least partial ownership, but that he was willing to settle for just his investment back to avoid a lengthy court battle. Common-law marriage. We'd never even discussed marriage, let alone met any requirements for common-law status. He also said you'd been having some emotional problems since the breakup and weren't thinking clearly about the financial realities. He was very concerned about you, Maya. He said he didn't want to hurt you, but he couldn't afford to lose everything he'd put into that house. Everything he'd put into my house with my money. Lisa, I need you to listen to me very carefully. He has never paid rent, utilities, property taxes, insurance, or any other expense related to that house. I have 6 years of bank statements proving this. He has no legal claim to anything, and there is no property dispute. But Maya, he had documentation. Bank statements, receipts for home improvement supplies, photos of work he'd done on the property. My blood went cold. What kind of bank statements? Pictures on his phone of deposit slips and payment confirmations. He said they were proof of his financial contributions to household expenses. He'd been documenting his case for months, photographing anything that could be taken out of context. Deposit slips from the rare occasions when he'd contributed anything, receipts for purchases I'd made that he could claim credit for, photos of improvements to make it look like he'd paid for them. Lisa, did he mention anything else about legal action? He said his attorney had advised him to document any harassment or threatening behavior from you, in case you tried to retaliate for his legitimate claims. He said he was hoping to resolve this amicably, but that he was prepared to take legal action if necessary. Harassment and threatening behavior. For locking him out of my own house. Did you sign anything besides the promissory note? Just a witness statement saying that I'd observed him talking about property improvements and future plans for the house during family visits. He said it was to establish the duration of your domestic partnership. My sister had just provided him with false documentation supporting his fabricated legal case because she'd believed his lies about our relationship and my supposed instability. Lisa, I need you to understand something. You've been scammed. He's homeless, unemployed, and completely dependent on other people's money and sympathy. The legal case doesn't exist, the attorney doesn't exist, and the promissory note isn't worth the paper it's written on. Maya, if that's true, then I just gave $2,000 to a con artist who's been practicing his skills on me for 6 years. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house thinking about how thoroughly he'd weaponized my own family against me. He'd used their love for me as a tool to manipulate them, claiming concern for my well-being while systematically destroying my reputation and extracting money from people who trusted him. But he'd made one crucial mistake with Lisa. He'd insisted she get his car title as collateral for the loan, thinking it made his story more convincing. He had no idea my sister was a paralegal who knew exactly how to perfect a security interest in a vehicle. The next phase of his campaign started appearing on social media 3 weeks after I'd changed the locks. David sent me screenshots throughout the day, as new posts appeared across different platforms. First, Instagram. A photo of him looking defeated beside his car with the caption, "Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who destroy your dreams. Learning to rebuild from nothing after domestic financial abuse." Survivor story. Shark starting over. Mental health matters. Then Facebook. A longer post about toxic relationships and financial manipulation tactics that painted him as someone who'd escaped an abusive situation where he'd been controlled through housing insecurity and emotional blackmail. But the most disturbing was his Twitter thread, which had started gaining traction with retweets and supportive comments. He'd crafted it like a cautionary tale about recognizing red flags in relationships, positioning himself as someone sharing hard-won wisdom about surviving manipulation. Thread. How I escaped a financially abusive relationship. 147, it began. and continued with detailed descriptions of alleged behavior that bore no resemblance to our actual relationship, but sounded convincing to strangers. He described a partner who'd isolated him from friends, controlled his access to money, and used property ownership as a tool of manipulation. He claimed to have documentation of threatening behavior and harassment patterns that had forced him to seek legal protection. The comments were heartbreaking to read. Dozens of people sharing their own stories of abuse, offering him support and resources, expressing outrage at his treatment. Several people had shared his GoFundMe link, which had now raised over $3,000. But what made it truly insidious was how he'd woven just enough truth into the lies to make them believable. Yes, he'd been financially dependent. He just reversed who was supporting whom. Yes, there had been conflict about money. He just changed who was being unreasonable. Yes, someone had been locked out of housing. He just switched the victim and perpetrator. The manipulation was so sophisticated that even people who knew us were starting to question what they'd witnessed firsthand. His sister Emma called me that evening, sounding confused and upset. "Maya, I've been looking at his social media posts, and some of the details match things he's told our family over the years." "What kind of details?" "Like, he's always complained that you were controlling about money and didn't appreciate his contributions to the relationship. And there were times when he'd mention feeling trapped or unappreciated." "Emma, think about what you actually observed when we were together." "That's just it. I'm starting to doubt my own memories. He's so specific about dates and conversations. And the emotional stuff, I mean, he's always been sensitive about feeling valued and understood." This was exactly what he was counting on. He'd been laying groundwork for this narrative for years, planting seeds of doubt and resentment that he could later point to as evidence of his mistreatment. "Has he asked for more money since the loan from your parents?" "Not directly, but he started a crowdfunding campaign, and he's been very strategic about sharing it. Not pushy, just making sure everyone knows it exists." The crowdfunding campaign had evolved beyond simple requests for housing help. Now it was positioned as a fund for legal fees, therapy costs, and rebuilding resources for abuse survivors. He'd created different versions for different audiences. One focused on homelessness for sympathy donors, another focused on legal battles for people who wanted to support someone fighting back against injustice. But the most disturbing development came when David called to tell me about his latest strategy. "Maya, he started contacting people individually with evidence of your alleged behavior. Photos, text screenshots, voice recordings. I don't know how much is real versus fabricated, but he's building what looks like a comprehensive case against you." "What kind of evidence?" "He showed someone a recording of you allegedly threatening him, but it was just audio, no video, and the voice was muffled. He had text messages that supposedly showed you being controlling and manipulative, but they were cropped screenshots without context." "David, you know those are either fake or taken out of context, right?" "Of course I know that. But Maya, not everyone knows you like I do. To strangers, this looks like a documented pattern of abuse. He's very convincing, and the evidence appears substantial if you don't know what to look for." That night, I lay in bed thinking about how completely he'd turned reality inside out. He'd taken every aspect of our actual relationship, his unemployment, his financial dependence, his sense of entitlement to my property, his manipulation and lies, and flipped the script to make me the villain in his story. But stories told by con artists have a fatal flaw. They require constantly expanding lies to maintain credibility. And eventually, the lies become too complex to keep straight. The call that changed everything came from his mother on a Tuesday morning in May, exactly 2 months after I'd changed the locks. "Maya, this is going to be a difficult conversation, but I need to speak with you about my son." I'd always liked his mother. She was a practical woman who worked as a school administrator and had little patience for drama or excuses. "I've been piecing together information from multiple sources, and I'm starting to understand that everything he's told our family about your relationship has been lies." She sounded exhausted, like someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for months. "What finally made you realize?" "Yesterday he called asking for money to pay his attorney, said he needed $3,000 immediately or he'd lose his case against you. When I asked for the attorney's contact information so I could pay directly, he got angry and defensive." "Did you give him the money?" "I called the number he'd given me for his lawyer. It was a pizza restaurant." Her voice was flat with disgust. "Maya, there is no attorney. There is no legal case. There is no property dispute. It's all been fabricated." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness for his parents, who'd been manipulated just as thoroughly as everyone else. "I started making other calls after that," she continued. "I spoke with your sister, with some of your mutual friends, with his ex-girlfriend from college. The pattern is always the same. He tells elaborate lies to get money and sympathy, and when people start asking questions, he disappears and moves on to new targets. How much money has he gotten from your family? Over the past 6 months? Nearly $8,000? We've been sending him regular payments because he said you were having financial problems and he was trying to help you stay afloat. $8,000 extracted from his parents under the pretense of helping me, while he lived rent-free in my house and complained about my spending habits. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. In 6 years of dating my son, did he ever pay rent or contribute significantly to household expenses? Never. I have bank statements going back 6 years that show I paid for everything. That's what I was afraid of. She paused, and I heard the weight of disappointment in her voice. His father and I have been enabling this behavior without realizing it. Every time we've sent money thinking we were helping you both, we've actually been funding his ability to avoid responsibility. Where is he now? As of yesterday, he's been staying at different friends' places, burning through their patience and goodwill just like he did with you. But Maya, that's not why I called. Her voice became more serious. I called because he's escalating. The lies are getting more elaborate and more dangerous. Yesterday, he told his uncle that you'd been physically violent with him and that he was considering filing assault charges. Assault charges, based on absolutely nothing, but designed to terrorize me and generate more sympathy for him. He's also been contacting your employer, she continued. He called your office yesterday claiming to be concerned about your mental health and asking if they'd noticed any changes in your behavior or work performance. My employer. He was trying to sabotage my job based on his fictional narrative about my instability. His father and I have made a decision. We're cutting him off completely, and we're giving him one final choice. He can accept a job with his uncle in Arizona and start over with genuine work and real responsibilities. Or he can continue this path alone without any financial or emotional support from our family. What did he say? He accused us of being manipulated by you and said we were abandoning him in his time of greatest need. He claimed his crowdfunding success proved that strangers understood his situation better than his own family. How much has he raised online? Over $6,000 from people who believe his story about escaping an abusive relationship. Maya, I want you to know that I'll be contacting the platforms to report his campaigns as fraudulent, and I'll be reaching out to everyone who donated to explain the real situation. After we hung up, I sat in my peaceful house, the house I'd inherited, maintained, and protected from his schemes, and thought about how his con game had finally collapsed under its own weight. The lies had become too numerous and contradictory to maintain, and the people who knew him best had started comparing notes. 6 months later, I learned from Emma that he'd eventually taken the job in Arizona, where his uncle put him to work doing actual manual labor for actual wages. The social media campaigns disappeared overnight. The GoFundMe pages were shut down after his mother's reports. The crowdfunding donors received refunds and apology emails explaining the fraudulent nature of his claims. Sarah texted me occasionally with updates. He tried to reconnect with her once from Arizona, but she'd blocked him immediately. Lisa got her $2,000 back when the car he'd used as collateral was repossessed for non-payment, and she applied the proceeds to his debt. David told me that our mutual friends had been more angry about the manipulation than embarrassed about being fooled. Several of them had sent donations to actual domestic violence organizations in response to learning how he'd exploited that cause for his personal gain. As for me, I kept the house, kept my job, and kept the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the most important word in the English language is no. I learned that supporting someone's dreams doesn't mean funding their delusions, and that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling. The spare bedroom became my home office. The garage became my workshop. The dining room became a place for hosting dinner parties with friends who appreciated both my cooking and my grandmother's china cabinet. And every morning when I unlock my front door with my own key, I remember that home isn't just about the roof over your head. It's about having the courage to decide who gets to stay and who has to leave.